The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard where 12 human children lay motionless. Their small bodies were twisted at unnatural angles, dark stains spreading beneath them like spilled paint. Alex Rivera knelt beside the smallest one, a girl who could not have been more than 8 years old. Her fingers still clutched a crude drawing of a spaceship, the paper now soaked with blood. The Caliph enforcer stood nearby, his scaled green skin gleaming in the sunlight. His weapon still hummed with residual energy, wisps of smoke rising from its barrel. The alien's yellow eyes showed no emotion as he surveyed his work. To him, these were not children, but simply disobedient livestock that had been properly corrected. "Let this serve as a lesson," the enforcer announced in his harsh, clicking voice. "Humans are forbidden from creating images of technology. This law has stood for 3 centuries. It will continue to stand." Alex's hands trembled as he closed the girl's eyes. Around the courtyard, other humans watched in silence. Their faces were carefully blank, emotions suppressed through generations of conditioning. The Caliph had taught them well that resistance meant death, hope meant death. Even dreaming of freedom meant death, but something was different today. Alex could feel it stirring deep in his chest, a cold fire that had been dormant for so long he had forgotten it existed. The feeling spread through his body like electricity, making his muscles tense and his vision sharpen. For the first time in decades, Alex Rivera felt truly angry. The enforcer noticed his expression and clicked his tongue in disapproval. "Human designation 7749, you will report for reconditioning. Your emotional response is unacceptable." Alex stood slowly, his eyes never leaving the alien's face. "My name is Alex Rivera," he said quietly, "and I am done taking orders from you." The enforcer's weapon snapped up, but Alex was already moving. 300 years of suppressed human instincts erupted in a single moment of violence. He tackled the alien to the ground, his hands finding the creature's throat before it could fire. The Caliph's claws raked across his arms, drawing blood. But Alex did not let go. The other humans in the courtyard watched in stunned silence as their fellow prisoner strangled an alien enforcer with his bare hands. When the creature finally went limp, Alex stood and looked around at their faces. He saw fear there, but also something else. Something that had been buried for centuries but never truly died. "They killed our children," Alex said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "They killed our children for drawing pictures." An old woman stepped forward, her weathered hands shaking. "We cannot fight them," she whispered. "They are too strong. They have ships and weapons and armies." "They have always been too strong," Alex replied. "But they made a mistake today. They reminded us who we used to be." Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out. The news of the children's execution spread through hidden networks faster than the Caliph could track. In underground bunkers and secret meeting places, humans gathered to share the story. Each telling added fuel to a fire that had been smoldering for generations. In the ruins of old New York, a former soldier named Maria Santos heard the news and felt her military training surge back to life. She had been working in a food processing plant for 40 years, her skills deliberately wasted by alien masters who feared human military capability. Now she remembered the weight of a rifle in her hands and the satisfaction of a perfectly executed strategy. In the remains of London, a physicist named William Foster looked up from his assigned task of sorting garbage and remembered the elegant beauty of quantum mechanics. The Caliph had forbidden all scientific education, forcing brilliant minds to waste away in menial labor. But knowledge, once learned, could not be completely erased. In what had once been Tokyo, a young engineer named Tom Bradley discovered a hidden cache of pre-invasion technical manuals. His grandfather had been a computer programmer before the conquest and had hidden these documents in the hope that someday they might be useful again. Tom's hands trembled as he opened the first manual and began to read. The Caliph noticed the increased agitation among their human subjects but dismissed it as temporary emotional instability. Administrator Thekmar filed his daily report with minimal concern. The livestock had been disturbed by the necessary correction of the young ones. But proper reconditioning would restore order within days. He was wrong. The anger was spreading like a virus, jumping from person to person through hidden networks and whispered conversations. Humans who had accepted their fate for decades suddenly found themselves questioning everything. Why did they work in factories, while their masters lived in luxury? Why were they forbidden to learn and create? Why did they accept orders from creatures who saw them as nothing more than clever animals? The Caliph had studied human compliance for 3 centuries. They understood how to break the human spirit through systematic oppression and careful psychological conditioning. They knew how to keep their subjects docile through a combination of fear, dependency, and artificial scarcity, but they had never studied human rage. They had never seen what happened when 300 years of suppressed anger finally found a target. They had never witnessed the terrible fury of a species that had once conquered its own world through sheer determination and ruthless innovation. In the depths of underground bunkers, former soldiers cleaned weapons that had been hidden for generations. In abandoned laboratories, scientists began to remember formulas and principles that had been forbidden for centuries. In the shadows of ruined cities, engineers started to dream of machines that could challenge alien technology. The Caliph had made one critical error in their centuries of rule. They had assumed that humans were naturally docile because they had been successfully suppressed. They had forgotten that peace was not the absence of violence but the presence of choice. Alex Rivera stood in the courtyard as the sun set, the alien enforcer's body growing cold at his feet. Other humans had gathered around him, their faces showing emotions that had been forbidden for generations. Fear was still there, but it was mixed with something far more dangerous. Tomorrow, the Caliph would send more enforcers. They would demand explanations and inflict punishments. They would try to restore the order that had kept humanity enslaved for 3 centuries. But tonight, for the first time in living memory, humans were remembering how to hate. And once that particular flame was lit, it would be very difficult to extinguish. The revolution had begun with the death of children and the awakening of sleeping dragons. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had once been feared before their capture, and why keeping them caged had been the Caliph's greatest mistake. The underground tunnel system beneath Old Chicago had been forgotten for almost 2 centuries. Water dripped from rusted pipes overhead as Maria Santos descended deeper into the darkness, her footsteps echoing off crumbling concrete walls. The Caliph had sealed most of these passages decades ago, but they had missed this one. Now it served as a meeting place for humans who remembered what freedom felt like. 43. People had gathered in the abandoned subway station, their faces illuminated by flickering candles. They came from different work assignments across the city, each carrying the same fire that had been lit by news of the children's massacre. Maria recognized some of them from her military service before the conquest. Others were strangers united only by their shared rage. "The enforcers are searching for Alex Rivera," whispered a woman named Janet, her voice barely audible above the distant sound of dripping water. "They have triple patrols in his sector. 3 more humans have been executed for questioning the incident." Maria nodded grimly. She had expected this response. The Caliph always met defiance with overwhelming force, crushing any sign of rebellion before it could spread. It was a strategy that had worked for 3 centuries, but something felt different this time. "They are afraid," Maria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had once commanded troops in battle. "For the first time in generations, they are actually afraid of us," an old man named Robert laughed bitterly. "Afraid? They have orbital weapons platforms and energy shields. We have kitchen knives and farm tools. What could they possibly fear? From us?" Maria's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "They fear what we might become if we remember who we used to be. They have kept us ignorant and separated for good reason. United humans are dangerous humans." Across the planet, similar gatherings were taking place in hidden locations. The news of the children's deaths had spread through networks that the Caliph did not even know existed. Humans who had worked in communication centers had built secret transmission systems. Those assigned to transportation had created hidden supply lines. Even the most carefully monitored sectors had developed ways to pass information. In the ruins of Berlin, William Foster stood before a group of former scientists and engineers. The basement where they met had once been a research laboratory, its equipment stripped away by the conquerors, but its purpose never forgotten. William's hands shook as he held up a textbook that had been hidden for decades. "They made us forget," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They made us believe that science was beyond our understanding, that only they possessed the intelligence to comprehend the universe. But we built these cities. We created these machines. We explored the stars before they came." A young woman named Lisa raised her hand tentatively. "But their technology is so advanced. How can we hope to match weapons that can destroy entire cities?" William smiled for the first time in years. "Because we understand their technology better than they think. We have been maintaining their machines for 3 centuries. We know their weaknesses, their design flaws, their dependencies. And most importantly, we know how to improvise." The group spent the next several hours sharing knowledge that had been forbidden for generations. Chemical formulas were recalled from memory. Engineering principles were discussed in whispered conversations. Mathematical concepts were drawn in the dirt with trembling fingers. In Tokyo, Tom Bradley had assembled a team of young humans who still remembered fragments of their technological heritage. The cache of technical manuals his grandfather had hidden contained blueprints for devices that could challenge alien surveillance systems. More importantly, they contained the theoretical framework for understanding how Caliph technology actually worked. "Their communication network relies on quantum entanglement," Tom explained to his eager listeners. "But the encryption is based on mathematical principles that human scientists developed centuries ago. If we can build the right equipment, we can not only intercept their messages but actually insert our own." The group worked through the night, using salvaged components to construct primitive but functional electronic devices. They had no proper tools, no clean facilities, no testing equipment. But they had something the Caliph had never possessed: the ability to make something work with whatever materials were available. Administrator Vekmer noticed the increased activity among his human subjects but attributed it to temporary emotional disturbance. His reports to the Caliph High Command continued to minimize the situation. The livestock were agitated, but proper reconditioning would restore order within days. He was making a critical error. The Caliph had ruled through fear and isolation, keeping humans separated and ignorant. But the children's massacre had created a shared experience that transcended these barriers. For the first time in centuries, humans across the planet were working toward a common goal. The awakening was not just about remembering forbidden knowledge or reconnecting with lost skills. It was about reclaiming human identity itself. The Caliph had systematically destroyed human culture, replacing it with a bland uniformity designed to promote compliance. But culture, like knowledge, could not be completely erased. In hidden gatherings across the world, humans began to share stories that had been passed down through generations. They sang songs that had been forbidden for centuries. They recited poems that preserved the memory of human achievement and human dignity. Each act of cultural defiance was a small victory against the system that had tried to reduce them to mere livestock. The technical knowledge was important, but the emotional awakening was even more crucial. Humans were remembering what it felt like to take pride in their accomplishments, to feel loyalty to their own species, to believe that they deserved better than slavery. Maria Santos felt this change most acutely. In her assigned work at the food processing plant, she had been a model of compliance for decades. But now she found herself analyzing the facility's security systems, noting the patrol patterns of the Caliph overseers, identifying potential weaknesses in their defensive arrangements. Her fellow workers noticed the change in her behavior. Where once she had moved with the mechanical precision of a broken spirit, now she carried herself with the confidence of someone who remembered what authority felt like. Other humans began to look to her for guidance, recognizing something in her manner that reminded them of better days. "We need to be careful," she told them during their brief rest periods. The Caliph are watching us more closely now. But we also need to be ready. This opportunity will not last forever. The network of resistance was growing stronger each day. Former soldiers like Maria provided military expertise. Scientists like William offered technical knowledge. Engineers like Tom supplied practical skills. But the most important contribution came from ordinary humans who simply refused to accept their fate any longer. The Caliph had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed that 3 centuries of oppression would permanently break the human spirit. They had believed that generations of conditioning would eliminate the capacity for organized resistance. They had never considered that human nature might be more resilient than their psychological models suggested. The awakening was spreading like wildfire through the underground networks. Each day brought new recruits, new skills, new possibilities. The humans were remembering not just what they had been, but what they could become again. In the depths of the Chicago tunnels, Maria Santos looked around at the faces of her fellow conspirators. They were no longer the broken remnants of a conquered species. They were becoming something that the Caliph had never seen before. Humans who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The revolution was gathering momentum. And the galaxy was about to learn why keeping humans caged had been the Caliph's greatest mistake. The Caliph communication array hummed with electronic chatter as Tom Bradley crouched in the maintenance shaft above the primary data center. His modified scanner, built from salvaged components and pre-conquest technical manuals, decoded the alien transmissions with surprising efficiency. The reptilian overseers had never imagined that their human maintenance workers could understand their technology well enough to spy on them. 3 weeks had passed since the children's massacre and the invisible war had begun. The Caliph noticed equipment failures and communication disruptions, but they attributed these problems to aging infrastructure and human incompetence. They had no idea that their most trusted workers were systematically sabotaging their own systems. Tom's earpiece crackled with static before Kate Sullivan's voice came through clearly. Transport convoy approaching Sector 7. Estimated arrival. In 20 minutes, all units prepare for signal disruption. Kate had been a Special Forces operative before the conquest, trained in infiltration and guerrilla warfare. The Caliph had assigned her to sanitation duty, believing that menial labor would break her spirit. Instead, she had spent 30 years learning their routines, mapping their facilities, and identifying their weaknesses. "Copy that," Tom whispered into his communicator. "Beginning network infiltration now." He connected his device to the alien data stream and began the careful process of inserting malicious code into their communication network. The Caliph encryption was sophisticated, but it was based on mathematical principles that human scientists had developed centuries earlier. Tom's grandfather had been right to preserve those technical manuals. The code propagated through the network like a virus, causing random delays and message corruptions. To the Caliph, it would appear as normal system degradation. They would never suspect that their human maintenance staff was actively working against them. Across the planet, similar acts of sabotage were occurring in carefully coordinated patterns. The resistance had learned to think like their enemies, using the aliens' own assumptions against them. The Caliph expected human incompetence, so they got human incompetence. They just did not realize it was deliberately engineered. In the industrial sector of former London, William Foster watched as his team of former scientists implemented their latest project. The chemical processing plant where they worked produced materials essential to Caliph technology. Small changes to the molecular structure of these compounds would cause gradual degradation in alien equipment without immediate detection. The beauty of chemistry, William explained to his colleagues, is that the effects are often delayed. By the time they notice the problems, the damaged components will already be installed throughout their infrastructure. His team had spent weeks perfecting the formulas, creating substances that would pass all routine quality checks, but slowly corrode the alien systems from within. It was elegant sabotage, the kind that required deep understanding of both chemistry and engineering. The Caliph quality control inspectors found nothing wrong with the modified materials. They had grown complacent after centuries of human compliance, trusting their conquered subjects to maintain the systems that kept them in power. This trust was about to become their greatest vulnerability. Maria Santos coordinated the resistance activities from her hidden command center in the Chicago tunnels. The network had grown from 43 people to over 2,000 in just 3 weeks. Each new recruit brought skills and information that strengthened the overall operation. "Sector reports are coming in," announced Janet, who had become Maria's primary communications officer. "Power grid disruptions in 12 major cities. Transport delays affecting 3 supply routes. Communication blackouts in 7 administrative districts." Maria nodded approvingly. The pattern was exactly what they had planned. Each individual incident appeared to be a random system failure, but together they represented a coordinated assault on Calith infrastructure. The aliens were being slowly strangled by their own dependence on human labor. "What about the orbital platforms?" Maria asked. "Tom's team has confirmed that the communication disruptions are affecting their command and control systems. They are having difficulty coordinating between ground forces and space-based assets." This was crucial intelligence. The Calith orbital fleet was their ultimate weapon, capable of destroying entire cities from space. But the fleet required constant communication with ground control to maintain targeting accuracy and coordinate with surface forces. If that communication could be disrupted at the right moment, the humans would have a brief window of opportunity. Administrator Vekimur studied the reports from his various sector commanders with growing concern. The equipment failures were becoming more frequent and more severe. Production quotas were falling behind schedule. Human workers seemed increasingly clumsy and inefficient. "Perhaps we need to implement stronger discipline measures," suggested his aide, a younger Caliph named Vorth. "The humans may be deliberately slowing their work pace." Vekimur considered this possibility but dismissed it. The humans had been conditioned for centuries to fear punishment more than anything else. They would never risk their lives through deliberate sabotage. The problems must be caused by deteriorating equipment and aging infrastructure. "Increase the reconditioning programs," he ordered. "Double the efficiency evaluations. If the livestock are becoming lazy, we will remind them of their proper place." But reconditioning could not fix problems that were rooted in systematic sabotage. The Caliph had created a system that depended entirely on human cooperation, and that cooperation was being quietly withdrawn. Kate Sullivan led her infiltration team through the ventilation shafts of the main administrative complex. They moved with the silent efficiency of trained commandos, their movements coordinated through hand signals and shared understanding. The alien guards never suspected that their cleaning crew contained former military specialists. Their target was the central computer core that controlled the planetary surveillance network. Tom's electronic warfare was effective, but it had limitations. To truly blind the Caliph, they needed to physically access the core systems and plant more sophisticated malware. "Security checkpoint ahead," Kate whispered into her communicator. 3 guards, standard patrol pattern. Moving to intercept. The guards never knew what hit them. Kate's team used non-lethal takedown techniques, leaving the aliens unconscious but alive. Dead guards would trigger investigations, but sleeping guards would be attributed to dereliction of duty. The computer core was exactly where their intelligence had indicated. Kate's technical specialist, a former software engineer named Dave, began the delicate process of installing the malware that would give the resistance control over the surveillance network. "This is beautiful," Dave murmured as he worked. They built their entire security system using modified versions of human programming languages. "It's like they took our own technology and made it worse." Within minutes, the resistance had gained access to every security camera, every sensor array, every monitoring device on the planet. The Caliph would continue to receive normal status reports, but the humans would know exactly where the aliens were and what they were doing. The silent war was reaching its crescendo. Across the planet, resistance cells were implementing the final phases of their sabotage campaign. Transportation networks were being systematically compromised. Communication systems were failing at precisely calculated intervals. Industrial facilities were producing defective materials that would cripple alien equipment, but the most important victory was psychological. Humans who had accepted their fate for generations were rediscovering their capacity for effective action. Every successful act of sabotage proved that the Caliph were not invincible. Every disrupted patrol demonstrated that organized resistance was possible. In the depths of the Chicago tunnels, Maria Santos looked at the tactical display that showed the real-time status of operations across the globe. Red indicators marked successful sabotage missions. Green lights showed communication networks that were now under human control. Blue symbols indicated Caliph forces that were cut off from their command structure. The aliens still had superior weapons and technology, but they were increasingly blind and confused. Their communication networks were compromised. Their surveillance systems were feeding false information. Their supply lines were disrupted by equipment failures that seemed like random bad luck. Phase 3 is complete, Janet reported. All major systems are compromised. We have control of their surveillance network and partial control of their communication systems. Sabotage teams report successful infiltration of primary targets, Maria nodded grimly. The silent war had been won, but the real battle was yet to come. The Caliph would eventually realize that their problems were not caused by equipment failures or human incompetence. When that happened, they would respond with overwhelming force, but the resistance was ready. They had weapons cached and hidden. Locations. They had identified key targets for the coming offensive. Most importantly, they had proven to themselves that they could fight back effectively. The galaxy was about to learn that keeping humans caged had been the Caliph's greatest mistake, and the lesson would be written in fire and blood. Dawn broke over the ruins of New York as Alex Rivera pressed his back against the concrete wall of the abandoned subway station. In his hands, he held a weapon that had been forbidden to his species for 3 centuries, a plasma rifle taken from a dead Caliph enforcer. The weight felt familiar, as if some genetic memory was guiding his fingers to the proper grip. Today marked exactly 1 year since the children's massacre. The resistance had chosen this anniversary for their coordinated uprising, knowing that the symbolism would give their fighters the emotional fuel they needed for the coming battle. Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out as humans emerged from hiding to reclaim their world. "All units report ready," came Maria Santos' voice through his communicator. "Operation Dawn Strike commences in 30 seconds. Alex looked around at his team of former slaves turned warriors. Their faces showed a mixture of fear and determination that he recognized from his own reflection. They had spent months preparing for this moment, learning to use captured weapons and studying the layout of Caliph installations. Now it was time to put their training to the test. "Remember," Alex said quietly, "we are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for every human child who will never be born if we fail today." The first explosion lit up the morning sky as Tom Bradley's team destroyed the primary communication array. The blast was perfectly timed to coincide with a system maintenance cycle, ensuring maximum disruption to the Caliph command network. Within seconds, alien forces across the planet found themselves cut off from their central coordination. Alex's team moved through the subway tunnels toward their target, the main administrative complex where Administrator Thekmer maintained his office. The building was heavily defended, but the resistance had learned that heavy defenses were useless if the defenders could not coordinate their response. The Caliph guards at the complex entrance were caught completely off guard. They had been expecting routine maintenance workers, not armed insurgents with military training. Alex's team eliminated the first checkpoint with ruthless efficiency, using tactics that the aliens had never seen before. "Impossible," gasped one of the dying guards. "Humans cannot fight like soldiers." Alex knelt beside the alien and looked into his yellow eyes. "We were soldiers before you came. We will be soldiers after you are gone." The fighting in the complex was brutal but brief. The Caliph had superior individual weapons, but they had no experience with coordinated human tactics. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming firepower and rigid hierarchies. They could not adapt to enemies who used creative problem-solving and flexible strategies. In London, William Foster led his team of former scientists in an assault on the main research facility. Their target was not just the building, but the knowledge it contained. The Caliph had stolen human technology and claimed it as their own. Today, that theft would be reversed. The quantum processing core is in the sub-basement, William told his team as they fought their way through the facility. If we can capture it intact, we will have access to computational power that can break their remaining encryption. The facility's defenses were formidable, but they were designed to keep humans out, not to fight humans who understood the technology. William's team used their knowledge of the building systems to turn the automated defenses against the Caliph. Garrison. In Tokyo, Kate Sullivan's infiltration specialists had a different mission. They were targeting the communication hub that controlled the orbital fleet. If they could seize control of the ground-based transmitters, they might be able to prevent the aliens from calling for orbital bombardment. "Security systems are down," reported her technical specialist as they moved through the facility. "Tom's malware is working perfectly." "The Caliph do not even know we are here," Kate smiled grimly. The aliens had grown so dependent on their technology that they had forgotten how to fight without it. Human soldiers had always known that equipment could fail, that communications could be disrupted, that victory often depended on individual initiative rather than superior firepower. The resistance fighters moved with a fury that surprised even themselves. 3 centuries of suppressed anger had finally found an outlet, and the result was devastating. Human soldiers demonstrated tactical flexibility that the rigid Caliph military could not match. They used captured weapons with deadly efficiency, improvised solutions to unexpected problems, and showed a willingness to sacrifice themselves for victory that the aliens could not comprehend. Administrator Thekmer watched the reports flood in from his command center with growing horror. Resistance cells were attacking installations across the planet with coordinated precision. His communication network was compromised. His surveillance systems were feeding false information. His guards were being overwhelmed by enemies who fought with skills that no human should possess. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his aide. "The humans have been conditioned for centuries. They should be incapable of organized resistance." "Perhaps," suggested Vorth nervously, "we underestimated their capacity for adaptation." Thekmar's claws extended in rage. "Summon the orbital fleet. We will sterilize the major population centers and rebuild with more compliant stock." But when he tried to contact the fleet, he found that the communication systems were completely offline. Tom Bradley's electronic warfare had been even more effective than planned. The Caliph forces on the surface were cut off from their most powerful weapons. The battle for the administrative complex reached its climax as Alex Rivera's team fought their way to the command center. The Caliph made their last stand in the heavily armored control room, using their superior firepower to hold off the human assault. "We will not be defeated by livestock," Thekmar snarled as he fired his weapon into the advancing humans. "We are the masters of this galaxy." Alex ducked behind a control console and returned fire. "You were never our masters," he called out. "You were just bullies with better weapons." The final assault was led by Maria Santos herself, who had arrived with reinforcements from other sectors. The former general coordinated the attack with the precision of someone who had spent decades studying military strategy. The Caliph defenses, designed for overwhelming firepower rather than tactical flexibility, crumbled under the coordinated assault. Administrator Thekmer found himself surrounded by armed humans in his own command center. His aide was dead, his guards were defeated, and his communication systems were under enemy control. For the first time in his life, he was looking at humans who were not afraid of him. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You cannot defeat us. We are technologically superior. We have ruled this galaxy for millennia." Alex Rivera stood over the alien commander, his plasma rifle trained on the creature's chest. You ruled us because we let you. That ends today. The reports from around the planet painted a picture of total victory. Major Caliph installations had fallen in every sector. The alien garrison was cut off from orbital support and running out of ammunition. Most importantly, the human population was rising up in support of the resistance, abandoning their work assignments to join the fight. In the communication center, Tom Bradley finally established contact with the orbital fleet. But instead of receiving surrender demands, the aliens in space heard something they had never expected, a human voice speaking with the authority of a conquering army. "This is General Maria Santos of the Human Liberation Force," she announced. "Your ground forces have been defeated. Your communication networks are under our control. You have 1 hour to withdraw from Earth orbit or face the consequences." The Caliph fleet commander was too shocked to respond immediately. In 3 centuries of rule, no subject species had ever made demands of the Caliph Empire. The very concept was so alien that he could not process it, but the evidence was undeniable. The ground installations were silent. The communication networks were compromised. The human livestock had somehow transformed into a military force capable of defeating trained Caliph soldiers. The revolution had succeeded beyond even the most optimistic projections. The humans had not just won their freedom. They had proven that they were capable of organized resistance on a planetary scale. The Caliph Empire was about to face its first major military defeat in over 1,000 years. In the ruins of the administrative complex, Alex Rivera looked out at the city where humans were celebrating their liberation. The sounds of gunfire had been replaced by cheers and singing. For the first time in 3 centuries, his people were free, but freedom was just the beginning. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had returned to the cosmic stage, and they would not be content to remain on a single world. The Caliph had awakened something that would change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The storm had been unleashed, and it would not be easily contained. The bridge of the Caliph Dreadnought Dominion trembled as another human missile found its target. Fleet Commander Zethkar gripped his command throne with clawed hands, his yellow eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed the impossible. His technologically superior fleet was losing to converted human cargo ships. "Impossible," he hissed through clenched teeth. "They have been slaves for 3 centuries. How can they fight like this?" His tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Morth, studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. "Commander, their vessels are using modified versions of our own technology. They appear to understand our systems better than we anticipated." On the surface below, Tom Bradley coordinated the orbital defense from his hidden command center. The resistance had captured more than just communication equipment during their uprising. They had also seized several orbital defense platforms, ancient human constructs that the Caliph had converted for their own use. Now these weapons were being turned against their former masters. "Platform 7 is locked onto the lead dreadnought," reported his technical specialist. "Charging sequence complete, ready to fire on your command." Tom studied the tactical display, calculating trajectories and timing with the precision of someone who had spent months studying Caliph fleet movements. "Fire all platforms. Concentrate on their command ship." The orbital defense platforms had been built by human engineers 3 centuries ago, designed to protect Earth from invasion. The Caliph had modified them extensively, but the basic operating principles remained unchanged. Tom's team had restored the original programming, giving them weapons that were specifically designed to fight in Earth's orbital space. The energy beams struck the Dominion's shields with devastating effect. The Caliph had never faced weapons that were designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses in their defensive systems. Their shields, calibrated for fighting other alien species, were overwhelmed by the precisely tuned human energy weapons. "Shields down to 30%, Morth reported, his voice tight with strain. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. We are losing life support in multiple sections." Commander Zethkar's mind raced as he tried to understand what had gone wrong. The human uprising should have been impossible. 3 centuries of careful conditioning had turned them into docile workers who lacked the knowledge and organization necessary for effective resistance. Yet somehow they had not only liberated their planet but had also managed to capture orbital weapons platforms. Status report from the ground forces, he demanded. No contact, Commander. All ground installations appear to be under human control. We have not received any transmissions from Administrator Thekamer in over 6 hours. The truth was even worse than the fleet commander suspected. Thekamer was dead, executed by the same humans he had once considered livestock. His body lay in the ruins of the administrative complex. A symbol of the price of underestimating humanity, on the surface, General Maria Santos stood in the command center that had once been the heart of Caliph rule over Earth. The alien technology hummed around her, now serving human purposes. She had spent decades dreaming of this moment, but the reality exceeded even her most optimistic projections. General, we are receiving a transmission from the Caliph fleet, announced her communications officer. They are requesting terms for withdrawal. Maria smiled coldly. After 3 centuries of slavery, the aliens wanted to negotiate. Put them through. Commander Zethkar's image appeared on the main screen, his reptilian features twisted with barely controlled rage. Human, you will cease this illegal rebellion immediately. Return control of the orbital platforms and submit to reconditioning. Your species lacks the authority to challenge Caliph rule. My name is General Maria Santos, she replied calmly. And your authority on this world ended the moment you decided to murder our children. The fleet commander's eyes narrowed. You cannot hope to match our military might. We command hundreds of warships across dozens of star systems. This single victory means nothing. Maria gestured to her tactical display, which showed the real-time status of the orbital battle. 3 Caliph dreadnoughts had been destroyed, and the remainder of the fleet was retreating beyond the range of the human weapons platforms. Your fleet is already withdrawing, she observed. It seems your military might is not as impressive as you believed. In space, the surviving Caliph ships regrouped at the edge of the system. Commander Zethkar knew that his position was untenable. The orbital platforms commanded the space around. Earth and his fleet lacked the firepower to destroy them without suffering catastrophic losses. Worse still, the humans had demonstrated capabilities that contradicted everything the Caliph believed about conquered species. They had organized a planetary uprising, captured advanced technology, and successfully fought off a fleet assault. If news of this defeat spread through the galaxy, it could inspire rebellions on every Caliph-controlled world. Commander, his aide whispered, perhaps we should consider orbital bombardment. We could sterilize the planet and claim the humans died from natural causes? Zethkar considered this option but rejected it. The humans now controlled the orbital defense platforms, which meant they could shoot down bombardment torpedoes before they reached the surface. More importantly, the complete destruction of a slave world would raise questions that the Caliph High Command was not prepared to answer. Set course for the nearest fleet base, he ordered reluctantly. We need reinforcements and new orders from High Command. As the Caliph fleet jumped to hyperspace, a cheer went up from the human command center. Alex Rivera standing beside Maria. Santos watched the alien ships disappear with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. They will be back, he said quietly. And next time they will bring more ships, Maria nodded. But next time we will be ready for them, and we will not be alone. The Resistance had captured extensive records from the Caliph administrative centers, including detailed information about other enslaved worlds throughout the galaxy. The aliens had made the same mistake on dozens of planets, underestimating the capacity of conquered species for organized resistance. Begin transmission on all frequencies, Maria ordered. It is time to share our success with the galaxy. The message that went out from Earth was simple but powerful. Humanity had broken free from 3 centuries of slavery. The Caliph were not invincible. Organized resistance was possible, and it could succeed. Within days, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Rebellions had erupted on 17 different worlds. The Caliph Empire, which had seemed unshakable for millennia, was suddenly facing coordinated uprisings throughout its territory. In the ruins of the administrative complex, William Foster, worked with his team to decode the captured alien technology. The Caliph had stolen countless innovations from conquered species, claiming them as their own achievements. Now these technologies would be returned to their rightful owners. "Look at this," he said excitedly, pointing to a schematic on his display. This faster-than-light communication system was originally developed by a species called the Vorthek. The Caliph conquered them 8 centuries ago and took credit for their invention. Tom Bradley, monitoring communication networks across the galaxy, reported increasing chaos in Caliph space. Their military is being stretched thin. Reports of fleet movements suggest they are pulling ships from border regions to deal with internal rebellions. The price of underestimating humanity was becoming clear. The Caliph had not just lost control of one planet. They had inadvertently triggered the collapse of their entire empire. By demonstrating that successful resistance was possible, Earth had provided a template that other enslaved species could follow. 6 months after the liberation, Earth had transformed from a slave world into the center of a growing alliance of free worlds. The orbital platforms had been expanded and upgraded using hybrid human-alien technology. The planet's industrial capacity, no longer devoted to serving alien masters, was being redirected toward building a fleet capable of defending human space. General Santos stood on the observation deck of the new orbital station, looking down at the blue and green world that had given birth to her species. The scars of conquest were still visible from space, but new construction was rapidly changing the landscape. Humans were rebuilding not just their cities but their civilization. "General," her aide reported, "we are receiving a delegation from the Vorthek Republic. They are requesting a formal alliance against the Caliph Empire," Maria smiled. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of that change. The Caliph had ruled through fear and technological superiority, but they had never faced enemies who understood their weaknesses and were willing to exploit them. "Schedule the meeting," she ordered. "It is time to build a coalition that will ensure no species ever suffers under Caliph rule again." The war was far from over. The Caliph still controlled vast territories and commanded powerful fleets. But they were no longer fighting isolated rebellions on individual worlds. They were facing a coordinated alliance of species who had learned from humanity's example. In his private quarters aboard the retreating dreadnought, Commander Zethkar composed his report to the Caliph High Command. How could he explain that a species of livestock had not only defeated a Caliph garrison, but had also triggered rebellions across the galaxy? "The humans appear to possess capabilities that our psychological profiles did not account for," he wrote carefully. "They demonstrate tactical flexibility, technological adaptability, and organizational skills that exceed our projections. More concerning, their success has inspired similar uprisings among other conquered species." He paused, knowing that his next words would likely end his career. "I recommend immediate strategic reassessment of our imperial policies. The era of easy conquest may be ending." As the report transmitted across the galaxy toward Caliph High Command, Zethkar reflected on the fundamental error his species had made. They had assumed that military superiority guaranteed permanent control. They had forgotten that every empire in galactic history had eventually fallen, usually from within. The humans had reminded the galaxy that freedom was not a gift to be granted by the powerful, but a right to be claimed by the determined. That lesson would echo across the stars for generations to come. On Earth, Alex Rivera stood in the same courtyard where 12 children had died 1 year earlier. A memorial now marked the spot, carved from stone and inscribed with their names. But more importantly, it bore a simple message that had become the rallying cry of the human resistance. They died as slaves so that we might live as free beings. The galaxy had learned the price of underestimating humanity. That price was the collapse of an empire that had seemed eternal and the birth of a new age, where no species would ever again be considered mere livestock. The revolution that began with the death of children had become a war of liberation that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. And at its center stood a species that had proven that the strongest chains could be broken by those who refused to accept their fate. Humanity had returned to the stars, and they would never be slaves again.